Hey, Allie, can you hear me? Today on the Women Mind the Water podcast, I am speaking with Maine author Allie Farrell. I will be talking to Allie about a book she wrote that explores the lives of women who catch lobsters for a living. The Women Mind the Water podcast engages artists in conversation about their work and explores their connection with the ocean. Through these stories, Women Mind the Water hopes to inspire and encourage action to protect the ocean and her creatures. Our guest today is Allie Farrell. Allie wrote Pretty Rugged, a book that explores the life of women who fish for lobster. In Pretty Rugged, Allie writes that the life of a lobster woman is extremely hard and dangerous. The sight of lobster boats is commonplace for Allie, who lives along the central Maine coast. Welcome, Allie. Thank you for being my guest on the Women Mind the Water podcast. It is a pleasure to speak to a fellow writer and also someone who, like me, is a transplant to Maine. Let me start by asking what motivated you to tell these stories?
Hi, Pam. Thank you so much for having me on, first of all. And secondly, when I first moved back to Maine about 4 years ago, I met a group of girls that I became fast friends with, and they were actually all female fishermen. And I loved hearing their stories that they had either doing shop work or out on the water or with other fishermen, some really interesting stories that I just felt should be shared with the world. Um, on top of that, when I was younger, my father used to fish offshore, off the coast of Newfoundland, and he would always come back with all these funny stories also. So I think I always had it in the back of my mind that it would be a really interesting story to tell.
What is involved in researching and writing a book like Pretty Rugged?
So I love the whole process of writing this book. Not only was it just so interesting, but I was really able to submerge myself in some of these little fishing communities. I would go out there for a whole weekend and stay and meet all the people, and you'd be out to dinner at one of the local pubs, and you would just meet all types of fishermen. Um, from 21 to, I don't know, 70, 80, and they all have these awesome stories, really interesting stories. Um, so that was one of the parts that I really loved about this. But otherwise, I would try and get out on the boat with them, and I would ask them questions, and I would try to get some great shots of them doing the work that they do. And honestly, really just trying to stay out of their way while I got what I needed.
So what sort of challenges did you encounter in telling these women's stories?
Well, COVID, as it did for everyone, put a real strain on this project. It was actually supposed to be released in spring of 2020, but when the first quarantine hit, the seafood market just completely shut down altogether, and there were no exports, there were no restaurants open. The wharfs weren't even buying anything. So it obviously didn't make sense for the fishermen to have their boats and traps in the water at that point if there was no outlet for their seafood. So we were actually, luckily during that time, able to make a significant impact with United Fisherman Foundation, and we were able to connect them directly with consumers, which was awesome. The communities all came out and had lines of cars going to do market pickup, COVID style, I guess you would say. So it was awesome to see that community come together. But honestly, even when the COVID stuff kind of slowed down and things did open back up, I still couldn't connect with a bunch of the people. Some of them were high risk. One of them, for example, is Virginia Oliver, who is out of Rockport, and she's 100 years old and she's still fishing. But they're people I admired and who made an impact in the fishing community. So it was worth it for me to just wait and try to document them properly.
100 years old and still pulling traps? That is amazing.
It is. Yes, she's a very impressive woman, and she still goes out 3 days a week. She goes with her son, and she does the work, and she says she'll do it to the end because it's what she loves and it's in her blood. And she's a very cool woman.
So I know you said you wanted to stay out of their way because you had your camera, but did you have a chance to put down your camera and try pulling up a trap?
On most of them, I tried to just not be a nuisance, honestly, because what they do, it's like a perfectly planned and timed dance that they do. And someone taking the wrong step in a wrong place, it's usually a guest on the boat that will do that. And it can make it dangerous for everyone on board. Um, Not to mention it will slow down their time, and they're, up at the crack of dawn and working really hard all day, and they want to be done and get off the water. So I'm not trying to slow them down, but I was happy to be able to just stay behind the camera because it's hard work. And I have done it before and it's very cool, but I give them a lot of credit for what they do.
One other question about what they do. Did you get a chance? I know you were trying to stay out of their way, but to put one of the rubber bands around a claw, that seems to me a pretty scary proposition.
I was able to do that. It's funny because the first time I was like, oh no, I don't even know what I'm doing. And then there's, an 8-year-old girl next to me, just like boom, boom, popping them on like it's nothing. So that gave me a little bit of confidence that I was going to be okay with all of that type of work. But yeah, it's very fun to be out there and very interesting.
And definitely a different line of work than us who stay behind the computer writing. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, I would not be interested in getting up in the middle of winter when it's freezing first thing in the morning and getting out of my warm house, going out in the ocean. Uh, I'm happy and grateful that they do that for us.
Right. So it would be great to hear more about one of the women you featured in your book, Pretty Rugged.
So Holly Masterson is, she's one of the people in the book, and she's a 5th-generation fisherman. She lives up in Southwest Harbor, and her family has always depended on the fishing industry. And likewise, the community has always depended on her family to provide that small community with fresh, healthy seafood. And they take that really seriously. And it's awesome to see. Holly herself is just a really impressive woman, honestly. She has her 100-ton captain's license. She's a mother. She's an entrepreneur. She's a local realtor, a pilot. She flies airplanes. And honestly, she's just really someone that the community holds in high esteem for her kindness and down-to-earth personality. So I felt really lucky to be able to meet her and hear all of her stories and stories from generations past. I believe it's her great-grandfather was actually lost at sea off of Gloucester, and she just kind of has that fishing lifestyle in her blood, and she loves it. But she also, she's worked for Martha Stewart, who has a house up there on MDI. And she worked for her as a housekeeper for a lot of years. And she hosted all these celebrities that it seems like a very cool situation that she had. And she, of course, provided them with all their seafood dinners, which they would have these big seafood dinners that were just amazing. And her herself, she actually has fished for lobster, shrimp, haddock, monkfish, cod. And I know a ton of people in that area and beyond that wait all year for her scallops because they say they're just the best and the freshest. And so I know a lot of people wait for those. But yeah, she's one of the fishermen that I got to kind of hang out with face to face and really get to know. And I will say she is a kind and humble person, like everyone says, and I feel lucky to have connected with her.
So for listeners, MDI is Mount Desert Island.
Yes.
Off the coast of Maine. So you listed off multiple things that she did or does. So yes. Is this something that she needs to do to support her income?
It's actually not. And it's funny because you see this across the board with a lot of these women who fish, and they're just extremely driven, honestly. There's a lot of accomplishments that they do in the off season, and they just do it because they see it and they want it and they get it done. So no, financially, they actually don't have to do a lot of these things that they do that are so impressive. They just want to, and they do it.
They're driven. Okay.
They are.
Did any of the women talk about changes in their industry? For example, how the warming waters of the Gulf of Maine has affected fishing?
Yeah, actually, there's definitely a very clear change in the water temperatures, and they're starting to see the lobster migrate a little bit, either heading north into Canadian waters, which is no-go for them. They can't fish up there. And the lobsters are also going kind of offshore where they can get a little bit deeper into cooler waters, and you do have to have a certain license to fish offshore also. So we are definitely seeing changes in the waters, which are affecting their businesses for sure. Um, they also have been bringing up some kind of interesting species that you don't usually see up here in Maine, like seahorses, for example. And they're bringing them up in their traps. And I think actually the lobster industry is a really great example of how the warming waters are already affecting real people, and it's not an issue just for future generations to deal with, rather something that's actually affecting us right now today.
So I'm no expert, but I think that seahorses, the farthest north, they usually come as like North Carolina. So this is a long haul for them.
It is, absolutely. Yeah. So it's a little bit scary because the lobster industry really drives a large portion of Maine. And if the waters get so warm that the lobsters aren't here, that's a problem for sure.
Right. So what did you learn about yourself in writing these stories about lobster women?
So I think one thing that I took away from all of these stories and putting the book together is just that, like I said before, these fierce women all really have that one thing in common, and that's that they just don't conform to the norm or what's typically expected of someone. Um, on one hand, they are these just really tough fishermen out on the water, some of the toughest out there. And then on the other hand, they have these off-season accomplishments such as attorneys, scientists, state representatives, pilots. And I could definitely go on with that list of really cool things. But the point is that if they want something, they're just going to go for it no matter how far outside the box it is. And I think that's really a lesson that all of us can learn and relearn throughout our life because your life doesn't have to be any certain way just because that's what's normal. And you should just get out there and take some risks and just do whatever sets your soul on fire.
All right. So how do you think these stories might encourage readers to engage with the ocean in more positive ways?
Yeah, well, I hope that it will kind of make a career on the ocean feel more accessible to readers, especially the young women out there trying to decide what they might want to do. And between aquaculture farming, fishing, studying the science and behaviors of the ocean, all of its inhabitants, there's just so many jobs out there that you might not expect that can really provide really fulfilling jobs and lifelong careers. And most of those careers come with an office view of the ocean. And I think everyone wants that.
So is there anything I haven't asked you that you'd like to tell the audience?
Oh boy. Well, it's certainly a very dangerous job. So I think that we all need to go thank our fishermen for getting all that onto shore for us.
Right. And this is the season for lobster, that's for sure.
Absolutely. And halibut.
Yeah. So, Allie, it's been most interesting talking with you today. I have gained a new understanding of the term women's work, and particularly the work of women who daily put on boots and go to sea. I'd like to remind our listeners that I've been speaking with Allie Farrell for the Women Mind the Water podcast series. The series can be viewed on womenmindthewater.com. An audio-only version of this podcast is available on the Women Mind the Water website, iTunes, and Spotify. Women Mind the Water is grateful to Jane Rice for the song Women of Water. All rights for the Women Mind the Water name and logo belong to Pam Ferris-Olson. This is Pam Ferris-Olson. Thank you for listening.